Pachinko also wrapped up this past weekend. And it's funny because this was another show. It wrapped up, and I was like, "There's got to be another episode coming out, right? Like, there's got to be another like step to this." Pachinko is a show that we know we're getting the second season to at least. So there's
Yes.
a lot more investment into this. So I'm looking forward to watching the second season because, gotta say, this first season, I thought it was a home run. I love so much about it. I love so much about the storytelling. Just
hmm
couldn't have been more impressed with it. How did you feel about season one of Pachinko?
Yeah, I would say Pachinko season one, the best, if not one of the best shows of the year thus far. I think for me, it's this and Station 11 are my top two contenders at this point,
Mm.
4 months through. I thought it was really impressive the entire time because it's such an awesome execution of vision with scope. It's such a large, grand scale story, and it really lands. It manages to juggle several timelines going back and forth throughout, and everything is paying off. All these emotional beats continue to hit, and it still finds a way to surprise you. As you said, the way the series ends, it's like, well, there's a lot of meat on the bone. Well, where Solomon's at in the plot, right? Shit,
Yeah.
can't wait to see more of that.
Yep.
Damn, you know, Hansu. We've just scratched the surface of his story, his origins. Of course, amazing episode 7, which is completely creation of the show, not from the book, where we learn about basically how Hansu became who he is when we're introduced to him earlier in the series. I really can't help but be impressed with just the whole vision of the series, and I think Kogonada and Justin Chan as the co-directors of all 8 episodes just absolutely smash it. Like I think it's really impressive show that just lands all these emotional beats with excellent acting. Like everything works.
Yeah, Station 11 being one of those shows that ends in January of this year is so unfortunate because I kind of forgot that it came out this year.
Yeah.
Because this is definitely my number one, and episode 7, chapter 7, directed by Kogonada, is definitely my number one episode of
Yep.
TV this year, maybe rivaling a couple from Station 11. But like you talked about, just an absolute triumph. Not only visually, but the way that the story is told of it, and the last like 40 minutes are just so tense and so captivating. And recreating the 1932
23.
23, wow, even earlier, 1923
Kanto
um
earthquake.
Kanto earthquake, and just totally uh amazing storytelling, amazing visuals. Just if you haven't watched the show, you should watch. But that episode, I think you could even just watch and appreciate on its own if you really wanted to.
Right.
You wouldn't understand some of the early stuff, but you could get enough of it to still enjoy the episode.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, going back to the storytelling aspect, I mean, the way the timelines all intersected, I was so impressed that they pulled off like jumping back and forth that much. Usually to a show, that's a huge boundary to actually like making a coherent show that kind of pays off all this. But I found it all to be incredibly worthwhile, and I don't know if there's like a wasted scene in the show. Like
Mhm.
everything had meaning, everything complements another part of the story and just grew out your understanding of these people so much
Yeah.
more. And just really impressive.
One of my favorite touches with how they juggle the various threads and timelines is that we'll often hear the last piece of dialogue, the last line from actually, sorry, we'll actually hear like the first piece of dialogue from a brand new scene, but it'll be over the image of the last scene
Mhm.
we just finished watching. And every time that individual piece of dialogue is applicable to the scene we just watched and the scene we're about to watch. And goes into this whole theme of like the power of language that is so central to Pachinko. Obvious note, of course, the subtitles for
Yeah.
us non-Korean and Japanese speakers are color coded based on when they speak Japanese versus when they speak Korean. And it really hits home the meaning of the intentionality of when they switch what language they speak, again, for us non speakers. And it connects again to just the whole theme of the series and Sunja's journey about what it's like to leave your home permanently, or at least permanently for decades on end, and be one of these Zainichi, these Korean expats in Japan that feel like people without a country, people without a state. And they do such a good job with everything in the present day timeline with Solomon because of that the grandmother character, the woman who won't sell her house to the bank that wants the land. And you learn about the power, the simple power of white rice made actually from Korea versus in Japan, and how it means so much to Sunja and the other
Yeah.
woman. And Solomon can't tell the difference, right? I just really like how they weave everything together with like the true sense of community and the power of language, because everything just pays off and it's set up throughout multiple episodes throughout the course of the series that all these these things really land. And I think
Uh,
if there's one thing that I perhaps liked just a little bit less, it would be the other aspect of Solomon's plot, which is what's her name, the
Anna.
yeah, well, the stuff in the hospital I thought was
Yeah.
still effective and very emotional, but I just wasn't quite as invested in that plot the way I was everything else Solomon was up to and everything Sunjo was up to across time. So that's my only note, I guess.
Yeah. Hana is a interesting character because she's kind of this almost like spectral character in Solomon's life, and kind of this, like, you don't really understand why she's in the show until about I think episode like 6, when you get that
Right.
flashback into like what she actually was to Solomon. Um, and I didn't know if her I think her character was almost more of just a plot mover for, or character development device for Solomon. You know, trying to
Mhm.
like get him back to his roots, and back to like who he was and how he's become this like businessman who is in some ways very much in line with his family history, right? With Hansu's like personality, and kind of how he developed this like cold-hearted, very like business like demeanor from
Mm.
being this very sensitive, kind, caring person, right? And how life has kind of like beat him down, and how these women in their lives were kind of this like sensitive aspect for him, but or for them, I should say. Um, kind of going, I just wanted to touch on your point about language, because I think there's, if you really pay attention to the show, like you said, you can start to see when the languages start to mingle more and become more like mixed, between Korean and Japanese, and in Solomon's case, Korean, Japanese, and English. And you talked about like when they're switching between the use of those languages, and then some of the scenes later on following Sunja when she finally gets to Japan. Some of she's told, when you're out in public, speak Japanese. Like, you want to fit in, you don't want to be recognized. And the times when they switch back are like when they use these like endearing family terms, like papa or mama, when they have a child, things like that, or when they use like these nice like names for each other. And it's really, I think, just impressive how thoughtful the show is about the aspect of language, and how that signifies like what home means to these people, as it's kind of like shifting in their perspective. um I just really loved that touch. Going back to Sunja, I don't know who had a more impressive performance as Sunja, whether it was Yuh-jung, who
Yep.
played older Sunja, or Kim Min Ha, who who I think is just absolutely so impressive. And I was like blown
Yeah.
away by just how good she was as this teenage into young adult Sunja. Just totally blown away by her performance, man. I thought she was a star coming out of this.
Yeah, totally. And that's what I think was so impressed about the writing of this series is that this character, and obviously a lot of credit to the book, this character is so fleshed out that you have two amazing performances from
Yeah.
two very different versions of the character going on at the same time in the same season of the
Mhm.
show. Like it's awesome, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a lot of meat on the bone for season two. Like
Yeah.
we you just yeah, pay attention. Like there's just kind of references to what happens to Noah. The Sanja's son,
Yeah.
technically with Hansu. We know something bad happens, but we haven't seen it yet. There's a lot more to learn about, and we're right in the precipice of the present day timeline where Japan's economy is about to collapse. There's references to this period about to start earlier in the series where they talk about Japan's economy being on track to surpass the United States and Japan becoming the wealthiest nation because the bubble hasn't burst yet. And we get some more further references to that where the other character, like developer guy, speaks to Solomon about how the dominoes are about to fall, but we haven't seen that happen yet, right? And man, like I'm just kind of blown away at like the possibility for a season two because this first season was so great.
Yeah, I think season two has a ton of potential. Can't wait to see it. Um, I'm just trying to think about like what other aspects of the show really impressed me. Um, it, I liked how the opening credits, if you didn't skip through them as the season goes on, it's
Mm,
based more and more back in the past, how it changes, and like it's kind of done more in a more traditional way, like the language of it changes, the
mm,
recording is different. I thought that was great. Also, Kogonada just really loves these like dance numbers, which
yeah,
I think is like a really nice like
totally.
touch to it. um yeah, I'm just trying to think like what other things I really loved so much about this show, man. I can't recommend it highly enough.
Yeah, I mean, come to think of it, we've discussed three shows today that are have a huge component of gender roles.
Yeah.
you know, Under the Banner of Heaven, Tokyo Vice, and Pachinko, like so much lately. But Pachinko just really nails everything. It's
Yeah.
marvelous show. So looking forward to that second season. And, just like you have episode 7, not from the book. That's perfect evidence that they can make a second season with less reliance on the novel because they've already did that.
Yep.
So the potential is really enticing.
Just speaking real quick to one thing I thought was really impressive, and that it kind of speaks to the detail of the show and the building of the stories and the characters. Is I think it's like episode 3 or 4 when
Mm,
um, uh, Kyung Hee dies, and uh, they have the priest come over to like say a prayer and speak, and Solomon later on is like, "Sorry, I can't be that priest that you like so much," and Sunja is like, he just reminds me of somebody. And at that point, you haven't met her husband, right? So
right.
when it finally comes around and you like, or you might have met him. I think he's like boarded at the house at that point, so you don't know that they're going to get together. And then he becomes this priest later on, or
Totally.
this like spiritual leader. You're just like, wow, like that little like line that reminds me of somebody just pays off so well later on in the
Hmm.
season, and it's just
Yeah.
so well done. The storytelling in this is just next level, dude.
Similarly,
Great
like
stuff.
we're introduced in the present timeline where Sunja's taking care of Kyung-yi, and then Kyung-yi passes. She's bedridden and then dies, and you just introduced as like someone from her past that she's taking care of, like an old friend or something. And then we actually realize through the flashback scenes later when Sunja goes to Osaka, like we learn so much more
Oh
about
yeah,
how integral Kyung-yi was to Sunja's life and
yeah,
making it through. So
and that
there's just so
scene,
much intentionality. It's awesome.
yeah, that scene between Kim Min Ha and Felice Choi, who plays young Kyung Hee, where they talk or Kyung Hee is talking about like how inadequate she feels next to Sunja because Sunja does all these things, and Kyung Hee's been there for like a year and a half or however long and doesn't know how to like do a lot of the things she does, and like just how she sees her like role in that country and in that world is so just so well done and like moving, and man, there's so many aspects about the show you could just look back on and be so impressed with. So um highly recommend it. I think this is probably going to be on both of our top 10s of the year.